Hey there, it's Doodlebud. Thought I would talk about a very important topic. What is the most important, the most critical part of a fountain pen? But before I get started, just a quick Happy New Year to everybody. Hope everyone had a great holiday season and you're kicking the year off on a good note. For me, when deciding what the most important part of a fountain pen is, there's sort of two sides I look at. I've narrowed it down to two, at least in my opinion. Is one, are we going to look for the best design quality, build quality, materials, all that stuff? So it's a very reliable pen, because let's face it, you can have the best nib in the world, but if you have a problem with the ink delivery system, that kind of screws things up. You might not use the pen because it just won't write properly, or maybe it has a bad capping mechanism or something like that. Or is it in fact just what's underneath that cap, that nib? Is that the most important part of a pen? Let's chat about that. So let's first talk a little bit about the design and build quality perspective. So this is a perfect example, the Pilot 912 with the FA nib, the super flexor. When I first got it, and a lot of people run into the same problem, it's the feed. This thing just would not keep up. Now I know for a lot of times, we get pens in the Western market that come from Japan, let's say, and they obviously have different characters, different script, and maybe that feed is sufficient for that. But over here, we want to use, these pens for writing maybe calligraphy or nice, beautiful flex writing, and this feed just wasn't able to keep up, especially with what this nib can do. So that was a bit of a fail. Fortunately, I went to the Flex Nib Factory, and they have an aftermarket option, a 2-slit or a 3-slit, and I got the 3, replaced the feed. Now that part of the pen is fixed. So we have a great nib, but we have a design flaw, and so that kind of messed up the pen. Another example is this Montegrappa Elmo. Beautiful pen. I bought it for the looks. This gorgeous Italian, look at that, material. It's nice and smooth. The writing on the band even there with the logo. Nice threads, all that good stuff. For a steel nib, this thing looks pretty darn good, I would say, but there are some challenges with it. One, I feel at some point the threads in that converter will give way because they're just getting slaughtered every time you take that converter on and off. One challenge with this pen, while I don't use it a ton, is for whatever reason this pen dries out quite a bit. I don't know, maybe it's the capping mechanism. There's no liner in here. Maybe that was a design flaw. Maybe this is unique. Maybe everyone else who has an Elmo doesn't have nib dry up issues. I don't know. But maybe leave a comment if you can. Let us know about that. But for me, I don't use this pen as much as I would like, even though it's great and it feels wonderful in the hand. It just dries out a bit too quick. And now we got the extreme example. This thing just has kind of everything wrong with it. I think even if it had a great nib, which it doesn't, you're just going to trash the pen anyways. There's too much to overcome. And I kind of went through this pen the other day too. There's just a lot of things wrong with it. But would you be willing to overlook all that stuff if it just had a real bang nib on it? Let's just face it, whether it's steel or whether it's big and it's gold, this is the business end of the pen. The nib's got to perform well or else you're just disappointed, regardless of how beautiful the pen looks. Now, one thing when it comes to nibs, it's typically easier to fix a nib than to fix a design challenge. There's just so much wrong with these pens. It doesn't matter how good the nib is. Same with this one. This one, I could have a gold nib on it, but if it's drying out all the time or if it's not getting ink, it can be really tough to fix that. So one benefit with the nib, I still think probably on average, everyone would agree that the nib is the most important part of a pen. But luckily, it is probably the easiest part to fix. I would say about 95% of the issues you have can be fixed in just a couple quick minutes. A couple quick examples from the nib side of the argument is this Lamy Dialogue 3. When I first got it, I got a medium just because it was so smooth and the flow was great. It was just the wrong nib for this pen, and I just didn't use the pen too much until eventually I swapped it out, got the extra fine, got it in the black, which looks kind of sharp, grounded to an Architect nib, so it's an extra fine Architect, and now this thing's inked all the time, and I use it so much more. Another example is this little Fully pen, the model 017. It looks pretty. There are some flaws with it, all these little dots, and I think these are maybe just bubbles from not having a proper vacuum, or at least long enough when they're pouring that resin. But that's okay. It's not a super expensive pen. The roll stop it's okay, but a little bit cheesy, but it still works. Just basic parts inside of the pen, but it's priced accordingly, of course. And it comes with a standard medium nib. and it wrote fine, pretty smooth, but I hate medium nibs. That's why I had to swap it on here. But now it has a cursive italic, and I just can't get enough of how well this pen writes. Next up is this Noodler's Ahab. You saw me, Happy New Year. So, I did this with the Noodler's Ahab. Now, there was flow issues. There's usually a number of issues when you first get this pen. But yeah, a lot of skipping in that. So I fixed the flow issues pretty brutally, mind you, on that feed. And I still didn't quite like it enough until I did, once again, swap out the nib, got the untipped, and now this pen writes the way I like it. And honestly, this is almost a daily carry now as I'm sort of practicing my penmanship and trying to improve it. I really enjoy how this pen writes. And of course, my Mont Blanc 149, when I first got it, it was a new old stock. It wrote terribly, so I sent this off to a Nibmeister, and they made it also write terribly. But I do want to thank them for doing that, because that encouraged me to end up just taking the bull by the horn, so to speak, and start doing some grinding and nib tuning myself. Now it's ground to the cursive italic I want, a fine cursive italic. The flow is perfect, so this pen now is just, I can't get enough of this pen. It writes so wonderfully, and it just, it's that iconic pen as well. But on the flip side of that is this Visconti Homo Sapien, which, so here we got everything right with what I want in the pen, but it's the one thing that's off, which is the nib, and I don't use it at all. A prime example of a fantastic nib is what's sitting on this Schaefer PFM. I chatted about this pen briefly in my top 5 pens of 2021, and I'm going to use it to do just a quick follow-up chat on a topic where I went through the difference between gold versus steel nibs. Now, there was a certain level of detail I went into, and there's a certain level of detail I didn't go into, but since everyone sort of likes the engineering side, I thought let's just go a little bit deeper. So one thing to think about is actually just what's physically happening with a nib. All right, so here we're going to zoom in. That's the tipping material. You got the slit there in the end of the nib, and your paper, again, isn't perfectly smooth. If you zoom in, it's all fibers, and they're crisscrossing all over the place, right? And then you got your nib. Now, if it's out of alignment, if the tines are off, it's just going to feel scratchy flat out. But one nib will feel super smooth. Another one will feel more resistance, more feedbacky. What that has to deal with is how much vibration is going through the tine. So essentially, if you zoom in real close, the tines are doing this on the pen, and you're going to feel that get translated up through the pen body and into your grip. So how the polish is done and the overall finish of the tipping material will play a part of it, but also so will the material in the nib itself. So since we're talking about vibrations, one parameter you want to think of materials is how fast the speed of sound translates through a given material. So it's different through air as it is through water, and also through different metals. So we're going to talk about stainless steel. Now, again, there's just endless different varieties of stainless steel, but it's just a generic one. And then we're also going to talk about gold. Again, with nibs, it varies. We're going to talk about 24 karat gold, but most nibs are going to be 14 karat, 18, or sometimes 21 karat. So the speed of sound through stainless steel travels on average at about 2,100 meters per second. For gold, it's 1,200 meters per second. Now, again, the rate will be a little bit faster because we're talking about a gold alloy. So it'll be in between these numbers somewhere, but significantly slower than it does through stainless steel. So what does this have to do with anything? Well, how quickly the sound waves, and in this case, it's going to be vibrations, right? So sound waves are vibrations, and so what we're feeling here through the pen. How quickly those go through the given material is going to translate into what you're going to feel in your hand when you're writing with that pen. So gold is more dense, it's softer, the sound waves travel slower, so it's actually going to absorb some of the vibrations, and also it'll vibrate just at a lower frequency than it would on a stainless nib. Now, there are some other things that will impact it as well. So what the pen is made out of will change that as well. So you can have a metal-bodied pen, you can have one with a lava resin, you can have a plastic, there's all sorts of different materials as we've seen with a pen, so that could have something to do with it. Also, it has to do with how the nib is situated. So maybe on this Opus Omar, they have a lot of O-rings. So if you essentially have an O-ring at the end of the pen going into the body, and depending where it's how the whole nib unit is sitting inside of it, that can also absorb, especially if you have O-rings, that can absorb some of those vibrations. But if we took the same pen and had the same size nib, same style, same, grind, same everything, and one was gold and one was steel right out of the gate, you're probably going to be better off. You can just see you have an advantage here if you want the writing experience to be a little bit smoother. So I don't know 100% for sure. There's some gear I would need to do this testing, which is beyond the scope of this channel. But this was one of the reasons I felt that, that it could be the bit of a bias. You get a gold nib, so you just want it to feel smoother. But there are some properties in the background, some physics going on that do sort of go to confirm that sensation you get, that a gold nib does just sort of, on average, feel smoother than the equivalent stainless counterpart. So when you think about what's the most important part of a pen, is it all about the nib, or is it primarily build quality of the pen? These are some ideas I had rolling around through my mind. And again, it sort of seems like to me, I think the average fountain pen user would tip towards the nib side. Let me know in the comments what you think about that. Some thoughts. Maybe there's a qualification, an idea that I've missed altogether. Would love to hear back from you as well. I'll leave it at that for now. Hit subscribe if you haven't. Comments, likes, all that is always welcome. And we will catch you next time.